Hey guys, welcome back to Ranger Survival and Fieldcraft. I'm Andrew, and what I have for you today is a discussion on the 10-piece kit for this season of Alone. This season, I think season 12 or whatever it is, they're going to Africa, and that's a way different environment than the usual environments where they go to more boreal forest regions. This time they're going to dry desert or grassland environments, just based off the clips I've seen, which means it could be like places like Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, or it could be places like Zambia, Angola, or Mozambique. So somewhere in the north half of the continent or somewhere in the south half of the continent is what I would guess. But I like the discussion about different kit items, and this year's packing list is a little bit different, where they're not allowed sleeping bags, they're not allowed snare wire, things like that. They're limited to game based on the draw weight of their bow, from what I understand. But it's also a completely different environment. The water that they're going to have needs to be really, really, really well disinfected in order for them not to get sick. And then they're going to have to rely on big game, I think, more than anything else. But also, there's not going to be a lot of vegetation to eat on the surface, so they may have to actually dig into the ground to go after roots and tubers and things like that. So a very different environment, which means a very different kit if you're going to be successful. So I thought I'd lay out the 10 that I would choose right now. The first one I would choose is the Spettzna Shovel. The reason I would do that is that I don't think there's going to be a lot of timber around the area. We're going to be relying on making adobe-style shelters if we don't bring any other shelter material with us, or we're going to be relying on grass to make that shelter and minimal timber. Most of that timber, if it's very scarce in the area or sparse, is that we're going to be using that for firewood, or we're going to have to move to a different section. And so I don't think we're going to be doing a lot of chopping and a lot of sawing of material. But this tool, the Spettzna Shovel here, is actually going to be a good tool to chop down material, process wood out. It's also going to give us the ability to dig into the ground. Now, we all know it's got sharp edges over here, so we can actually split. But we can dig into the ground with this, and then in emergencies, or if we're doing improvisational methods, you can burn the paint off of this thing and then use this as a frying pan to cook with. And what I also like about this is that besides it being an okay wood processor, is that the handle's wood. If it breaks, we can take it out and replace the handle and reshape one with another tool that we're going to bring with us. It's got the screws right here, so we can actually lock it in place. We don't absolutely have to have those. But then we can also get a longer stick to make a longer shovel, to reach a little bit deeper, especially if we're going to dig into the earth to go after those roots or tubers, or if we're going to have to dig out a shelter, get down in the earth, and then cover that with debris to make our shelter a long-lasting shelter to stay warm in. This thing will accomplish that. So I think a lot of the contestants are taking something like this and going to the field with it. I would highly recommend something like this. My own thought process is to invest time and energy up front into the shelter, into passive traps, into passive hunting, and then quickly switch once the shelter is established to continue with passive traps and fishing, but then move into more active stalking or doing some terrain recon and establishing different points to actually go hunting and go after wild game. So this is going to be a good shelter item, a good wood processor, and an all-around utility tool. That would be my first item. Next item, probably my personal opinion, the best pocket survival item you can have, and it's just going to be some sort of multi-tool. This one is just a Leatherman Wave, and it's that silver color, so if I drop it, I can find it easily, or depending on the environment, a little bit more easily than a black anodized one. But the tools are on the outside. You use that straight blade for carving, and then I'd use the serrated blade for meat processing. It's got a little saw for notches and things like that, so we're not out of a saw yet. And then we've even got that file on here to sharpen our hooks, sharpen that Spettzna shovel that we just showed. Pliers for manipulating that hook out of a fish's mouth if necessary. Wire cutters. We're not going to have wire on the packing list this time, and so we won't need the pliers or the wire cutters necessarily. It's still a good tool, a good option. It gets us a second hand to pull something out of the fire if we have to, so we don't burn our hands. And then it's got a bunch of other smaller tools on here, scissors for hygiene and fixing clothes and all that kind of stuff. But this multi-tool in the pouch right on the hip would be my number one pocket survival tool or belt tool because of the functionality of this. So this is the second item on the list. Now that third item is going to be the ferro rod. The ferro rod gives us fire, thousands and thousands and thousands of sparks right here. Plus, in this region, there's a lot of dead, dry grass, at least from the clips that I've seen with the contestants on it. And so fire's probably not going to be that hard to actually make out there. And I think some of the contestants are actually going to use primitive fire as their primary method, so they left the ferro rod off. Hey, that's cool. More power to you. I think I would be confident in leaving this and actually using primitive fire, but I would bring another tool to actually process that material. So I would just rather have this and have almost surefire anyway. Plus, later on in the series, or as the survival experience continues to play out over days and weeks, I would just rather have this to get a fire going than rely on primitive methods and save that energy. And so obviously, ferro rod, plenty of sparks. We can use the back of that saw blade as our striker. I would actually attach more cordage to this and then put on a physical striker to keep those two things together instead of using this, but this would be my backup. So that ferro rod will be the number 3 item, fire. Next is paracord for that 4th item. You're allowed 80 meters of paracord. That's 264 feet. Carry the 2. Yep, 264 feet. And so I would bring a wide variety of colors for shelter craft, for going after animals, for creating, track markers or whatever. A lot of different uses. Have some military colors in there for shelter craft or whatever, and then have some brighter colors. One of my strategies would be to create small mouse traps first, get those out, a dozen or more, because we can actually use the yellow and green cordage as a lure for mice. Their perception of color, they're attracted to yellow and to green, and so using that underneath some sort of primitive deadfall trap, we can crush a mouse, use that mouse, either eat it or use it for more bait. I would actually take that mouse, collect as many as I could, and then use those for fish bait to go after fish in the water, because apparently there's going to be a large number of fish in these water sources, and they're going to be very big, large catfish, and so they're going to want something big to chew on, and that mouse is a perfect piece of bait to throw in the water with a large hook and then use as a passive trap or some sort of fishing tool like a cane pole or whatever we have to pull in that large fish and actually get a real meal. But this can be used for shelter craft, used for field craft, make different tools, different items out of this, bright colors so we can see it. Once those days get longer and longer and longer, going into weeks and months, having some bright color around is going to be good. Plus, we can use these to hang around our shelter or on the game trail so we can actually find it and find our way out and find our way back fairly easily, especially if we're digging in the earth for our shelter and we're going to have some sort of, hide site or subsurface hide site, serve site to stay fresh in, get some sleep, and get some rest. And so we've got 264 feet or 80 meters of paracord as that next item. All right, so we talked about paracord and a little bit of fishing. That next item, gonna have to have it, everybody's gonna take it, and that is fishing line and hooks, because you're gonna be near water sources anyway. They're crappy water sources, they're gonna be disgusting, but they're gonna be fish in there. And in any survival situation, you always wanna fish first. And so we've got a series of hooks, 25 different assorted hooks, some catfish hooks, we've got octopus circles, we've got bait holders, and we've got some smaller hooks, and then 25-pound test. Probably going to jump up to 30 if I had a chance. Allowed up to 300 meters or yards, I believe, of that fishing line. And so this is going to be, I believe, or I think, your primary way of getting food, at least through passive methods, because we can actually use night lines or trot lines to cast out with a weight and then just leave them in place long enough for a fish to come by, grab on it. They're hooked, they can't get away, and then we can pull this in once we check those traps routinely. And so a fish kit, strong line, and then assorted hooks, 25 hooks, I believe. I think this is going to be the main thing that gets you food on that show. So that was 5. Here's the 6th item, and that's just a 2-quart aluminum Dutch oven pot. It's got 2 different bales on it, so we can hang it, and then a lid is included. Obviously, boil water, cook your food in here. The best survival food is to fill this thing with water, put in your game meat, and then bring it to a boil and just turn it into a soup. That way you can drink all the nutrients that are left over from whatever the animal, or it's like fat and oils and different minerals and vitamins from the animal. And then you can eat the meat afterwards, obviously, put more water in, boil it up again, and then finish off that soup. So you get a nice good meal. Survival stew is the best meal out there for survival because you get nearly 100% of the nutrients. And then, like I said earlier, that water source for the show is going to be horrible. You're going to have to boil that water and boil it hard. One thing I would do is probably take a piece of clothing like my shemagh or something and strain that water ahead of time and then put it in the pot, or take that shovel, dig out a coyote well, and let the water seep in through the ground to act as a natural strainer to get out a lot of that turbidity, hopefully, and then get the clean water or cleaner water, put it in here, and actually boil it to make it safe to drink. That's what I would do. That's my strategy with water disinfection. We've got that pot as our 6th item. Now, I personally, for my 7th item, would take a canteen because it's a dry, arid region. Now we have 2 containers to boil water in to disinfect and make safe to drink, and that means 2 containers to stay double hydrated. Staying hydrated out there in a desert environment is incredibly important. I've lived in the desert for years and years, and I know how quickly someone can get dehydrated and actually die. And especially if we're away from camp and we're out actively hunting or stalking or doing recon around the area, we want to have the ability to take water with us to make it out and then make it back. And so I would have just this water canteen, metal water bottle, again, so we can actually place this in the fire. If you couldn't tell, this has been in the fire quite a few times. And this is a little over a quart. It's about 34, 35 ounces. I think you're allowed a bottle up to 39 ounces. And so this is right within that sweet spot. Again, just another way to carry water. Wrap this up in a shemagh, tie it around or over the shoulder, and we can walk out and hunt or do our recon and find the resources. But definitely want to have a way to not only treat that water to make it safe to drink, but then to carry that water as well. And again, it's the desert. You need a lot and a lot of water if you're going to survive. Speaking of water, one other thing that we should probably have, especially for this environment, is salt block. You're allowed a 3-pound, I think, Himalayan salt block, and this is roughly 4 pounds. But that salt, not only to season meat, should you take game off the field, but this can go in the water to get potassium and calcium and a lot of different smaller minerals that we need, electrolytes, to actually replenish our body. This thing is awesome. We can also use this, shave off a whole pile and use it to actually help preserve meat if we had to. I would create a smoker and then smoke meat and keep it stored in a safe place, create some sort of food cache. It would be my personal strategy. But we could also use this to help preserve that meat if we had to. And this salt block means that we get those electrolytes back. We have a way to preserve food. It's also not going to melt on us or disappear. And so we have kind of a long-lasting source of food sustainability as well as electrolyte replacement, and even maybe oral hygiene. If we get some sort of tooth infection or whatever, we can scrape off some of this salt, use it as an oral rinse. Now, with this salt block, we can actually recreate or extract salt from natural materials around us. It takes a long time, though. We need to aim for things like oak trees, willow trees, hickory trees, pecan trees. Those types of hardwoods, we can actually take the wood and extract salt from it by either boiling it or burning it and then boiling it, and basically creating a reduction by boiling off the water until all that's left is kind of a black charcoaly substance at the bottom of our bush pot, and that will contain some salt to replenish our liquids, but it's a long process, so it's better just to have this as opposed to try to recreate it out in the field and waste your time and energy and your fire resources. So my vote would be just to bring that salt block out with me. All right, next I would definitely bring a wool blanket to wrap up in, just to stay warm. This is 100% alpaca. It's a queen-size blanket. You can wrap up in this and wrap up in such a way to stay warm, especially with a fire next to you, and maybe even just a basic debris shelter. The good thing about this is that it'll retain about 80% of its insulation value, even when soaking wet. And so this is going to be the only shelter item I would take, is just this blanket. You can see it's a very thick blanket, a lot of good insulation value here. I've actually used this blanket for a lot of different survival courses, and it's kept me warm with a debris bed and then some sort of overhead shelter. Again, we need something to sleep on, something to sleep in, and then something to sleep under. And so this is what I'm going to sleep in. I can recreate a debris bed from the grass in the area, and then I can create just a simple debris shelter starting out with from materials around the area and grass to give an enclosed shelter. I would go for a dome shelter first and then expand from there and probably dig subsurface. You could have an actual stove inside, a small fire to insulate the shelter, keep it warm, and then have a roof over top to protect from the elements if it actually gets really, really cold or if we get unexpected rainfall, things like that. Just some sort of shelter to get in and stay warm, protect ourselves from the really cold nights in the desert because it does get super cold. We could also use that water bottle because it's got a closed lid. We could fill this with hot water or just put this over the fire, cap it off, wrap it up with a shemagh or a piece of clothing, and then tuck this into our core right against our belly on top of our clothing, of course, and then wrap up in the blanket. And this could be that water bottle heater at nighttime to stay warm with. So that's another tool or another option with a closed container like this as part of the kit. So that blanket is that ninth item. And then everybody's favorite, that bow and arrow. This is a 55-pound draw weight bow, 9 arrows, small game heads, large game heads, broadheads, to go after all types of different game that may present themselves out there in that dry, arid region. And so my style would be to fish first and then move after game after I get oriented on the area. I would do reconnaissance and obviously find where game are moving. Camouflage, get out there, maybe set up a hide site behind a blind or tree stand possibly if terrain allows. Get to the high ground and then actually use this in more of a passive method to go after game. Once that game is taken, process it out, bring it back to camp, preserve some of that game meat, the rest to get that nutrients, and continue to survive. That food, obviously, the more food you get, the longer you're going to survive out there. People who don't survive on the show don't get enough nutrients, don't get enough food, or they just lack the mental fortitude to stay out there and suck it up. I don't know where I would sit. I know I've gone through training like that before, 61 days in certain areas with, maybe one meal a day, if that, constantly walking and moving around, burning 5,000 calories or more on a daily basis, and swimming, climbing mountains, rucking, all that kind of stuff. So I know that I at least have what it takes mentally to go out there and attempt to survive. But it's all based on luck as well. I would argue luck is going to be one of the huge components to survive out there on alone. But that bow and arrow is going to be the primary game killer, primary meat getter, and that's what I would take. All right, guys, that's my 10 items, kind of my rundown of those and why I would choose those and why I would recommend people choose those. Again, styles may vary. Maybe a saw is your type of thing. I would argue that there's benefits and drawbacks to every single item that you would take on a series like Alone, because you only get 10 of them. So it really depends on your situation, where they drop you, and then what you can expect from the area and your strategy and your ability to adapt to that environment and then get game, get calories, get food in you, and be able to stick it out the longest. So anyway, that's my 10 items. I really hope you liked this video. If you did like this video, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, leave me a comment in the comment section. I always appreciate your feedback. I want to thank you guys for everything you do for me, for this channel, for your likes, reviews, your subscriptions, your comments, your feedback, and your shares, and I will be back with another video as soon as I can, guys. Thanks.